Hello everyone, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the NewBeeDrone Acro BeeBrain Brushless. Features an F4 flight controller with an OSD, a 12 amp ESC running BB21 MCU, power switchable VTX from pit mode 25 milliwatts and 100 milliwatts. Featuring NewBeeDrone 0802 18,000 kV motors, a Z props, the NewBeeDrone camera, the Hardy Goober canopy, solid pin PH20 connectors. It does have programmable LEDs on the top and down here on the bottom. Mine weighs 23 grams. I flew it on this tiny Whoop 333 milliamp battery, bringing the weight to 31.5 grams. If you saw my video here a couple of days ago where I did a roundup, I went over this machine, and I didn't think that was fair because I need to show it to you and then you make your own decisions. I know that oftentimes in those sort of roundup videos, it really comes down to a lot of discussion points. Primarily, I have done the reviews before I ever do something like that, and I just wasn't sure I was going to review this one. And after thinking about it, you know, I just didn't think I was fair, like I said. So I went and I charged up some fresh batteries. This is a new run that I decided I was going to go out and try to push it. And so I had a wad of batteries with me, and I flew, and it does fly well. I think if you saw that video, you would probably get the perception that it was just a terrible product. And I apologize if I've colored your opinion of the product without showing it to you. It's something I shouldn't do. So it comes well tuned. It does come running Betaflight 4.1. It does have the VTX table set up, so everything is set to go there. It does come shipped to you in pit mode. So if you're trying to find your channel, you're going to have to be in very close proximity and be on the precise right channel. It may take you some time. I know it did me to get that channel the first time, so then I could go into the OSD and then change that. Of course, you can do it from Betaflight as well. So either way you go, I just want you to be aware of that. There's a number of things to talk about with this machine when it comes down to the hardware and what I noticed during my time of kind of looking at it and flying it. I think one advantage that it does have is that it keeps the battery closer to the prop line than probably in just about any other Whoop. So that can come out in the flight characteristics a little bit. It does feel very controllable, although it does come in 20% heavier than the Mobula 6. I think that's what everything is going to be going up against in Mobula 6. There are some other points that we have to talk about when it comes to this drone, because, you know, it's not just the drone that we're talking about. Sometimes we're talking about the company, where we get it from, how quickly we can get it, how quickly we can get support for it. And that's something where I think that when we purchase something like this from a company like NewBeeDrone, needs to be highlighted. But we'll talk about that at the desk now that the flight's over. For many of you that have watched my previous roundup video, there will be many of the same discussion points and a few extras, so it might be worth your time, if you're considering this, to listen to the second part here. So I talked about this Goober canopy. I've used this a few times before. It is very robust. It is very hardy. So that's something to be said for this. I don't know how much this weighs compared to other canopies, specifically the Mobula 6 canopy, but this one is very robust. You do have a locked-in camera angle, but if you DIY something, you could probably get a little bit more camera angle. I'm trying to highlight that little bracket at the back of the mount of the camera. You're probably going to have to do something by hot gluing that in, or using some other sort of adhesive to lean the top part of the camera back a little bit more. Or you can add something under these two positions where it mounts and then raise the front part of the canopy in order to get some camera angle. Also note that connector that's right down in there. That connector, while I won't call it non-standard, it is quite different from what we see in many other cameras. So if you want to change out the camera for whatever reason, you're going to need to either snip those wires and use that connector, or find that size of connector that is quite a bit smaller in height than we've seen before. And while we're talking about connectors, the motor connectors are also smaller. So if you wanted to try new motors, you either have to, again, snip these off and solder your other motor wires back on, or as you can tell right here, we do have solder pads that you can go to, which could be a bonus or a benefit when it comes to swapping out motors. Maybe you want to lose the connectors altogether and try to get that weight back down. We do have the NewBeeDrone. This is a new receiver to me. I have not used this one before, and it's got a very interesting antenna configuration there. It is very, very small. I presume that this gets pretty good range. And for those of you that run Spectrum, they do, once they have more stock, have these in the Spectrum or DSM-X. Of course, you can get it in FR Sky or without a receiver. You can add your own. This does have crossfire compatibility built into it, so that they have an actual wiring diagram on their website for running Crossfire Nano on here. Another point that I mentioned in my previous video that I should mention here is, do you see these little nubs right here? I don't know how well that comes out in camera. Let me move that connector. This little nub, and there's another one on the front. I think your battery is supposed to rest on that, but unfortunately, I just don't think that rear nub is high enough, because I don't know how well that comes in camera, but that nub just doesn't touch. Let me see if I can get a piece of paper and show you that a little bit better. So I don't know how well you can see that, but my little piece of paper goes right underneath that nub, which to me means that nubbin is supposed to sit the battery flush against it. It doesn't, and if you look real closely, you'll see, especially at the top here, you can see that brass connector, or the brass coated connector, is actually touching my battery. And that was something that I mentioned that I think, and unfortunately, I think we need to extend this down a little bit and make these nubbins a little bit taller to make sure that doesn't happen, because if you lose your USB port, of course, the outside portion of the USB port we don't necessarily need. It's that inside portion that we need for connectivity. But still, again, if you get to wiggling this whole thing off, then what do you have left? You've got to solder that connector back on. It could be a minor concern because the location of the battery, but if you're starting to hit stuff back here or up here, it could, you know, over time loosen that USB port, and it could cause some USB port damage. And with this plastic connector that they have here, that does kind of highlight the fact that these are not soldered on, which I do believe other solid pin connectors are soldered on. I don't know where they get these connectors. It's fairly interesting. I know tinywhoop.com sells their own, but to me, I don't think, it's really hard for me to tell, but take a look and choose for yourself whether those are solid pins or rolled pins. I'm just not certain. I mentioned it in the quick roll that they were solid pins, but zooming in here real close, there's either a little indentation on the end or they're rolled pins. I'm not certain myself, but one thing you can see for certain is that the connector is crimped on. It's not soldered on. So however you feel about that, you need to judge that for yourself. I do like their props. If there's one thing that I would encourage you to do is try out their props, the Z props. I thought they sounded pretty interesting. I liked how they responded on these motors. I've flown 18,000 kV motors, not these particular ones, on other quads. Well, of course I've flown these, but I've also flown other brands, and I thought that these motors, they weren't necessarily efficient, but they performed a little bit better than I expected as far as speed goes. And for racing, I would think they would want to come out with even a higher kV, maybe go 20,000 kV in this motor style. But again, you probably have to do something with your camera in order to be able to, you know, tilt a little bit forward, but still keep your racetrack, if you're racing, in view rather than looking at the base of it. But oftentimes in Tiny Whoop races, or sometimes in Tiny Whoop races, they have an LED on the floor that you might be able to use and still do some racing. I do think this frame is quite durable. If you look at the size of the struts that we've got here, everything feels very solid, and that's something else that you can get from this particular frame. And I think the last point to talk about is the price point. This lists for $149.99 on their price point, which is just about double what we pay for a Mobula 6, and that's hard to compete against. But if I had to make an argument for the company itself, I do believe that you would get some top-notch support, and you would get the reliability that the product that you get is going to work, and if it doesn't, they're going to work very hard and very quickly to make it right, whether it to be get you the new part that you need or to ship you out a new one. I should mention also that it does come in a case just like this, so you can store all your batteries in it, and the quad goes right down in there. So it's kind of just a nice little lunchbox sort of case, and of course the branding on the front, which is pretty cool looking. And that is all you get. You don't get extra props, you don't get anything that's extra, you don't get a prop remover, you don't get any extra screws, nothing like that. So that's the contents of what you will be getting. You don't get any batteries with it either. So there you go, there's my review of the Acro BeeBrain Brushless from NewBeeDrone. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.